Audiences who love Together have plenty of other horror romance movies to sink their teeth into. Together is a darkly comedic and occasionally grotesque horror movie about Tim and Millie, a struggling couple who find themselves merging into a single body. The film mines the concept for plenty of great body horror and darkly comedic beats, but the film's real draw is the wonderfully vulnerable performances by Alison Brie and Dave Franco, who find ways to make their characters sympathetic, frustrating, and hilarious all at the same time. Together isn't the first horror or romance film, but it may be one of the most critically acclaimed. Still, there are plenty of other great movies that use body horror to speak to existential fears or indulge in the conventions of typical scary movies to tell a more emotional story. If you are looking for another emotionally complex horror movie to watch after Together, these 7 films might be exactly what you're looking for. 7. Your Monster. Your Monster uses a horror transformation to comment on flawed romances. Similar to Together's fusion of romance dramedy elements with a classic horror subgenre, Your Monster is an emotionally resonant exploration of a complex romance by using scary movie tropes. The relationship between Laura and the monster explores some of the themes of codependency that Millie and Tim's relationship addresses in Together. Both films also use their obvious inspirations, monstrous romances, Beauty and the Beast or body horror like The Thing, to infuse their explorations of quietly toxic relationships with grisly visual touches. While Your Monster ultimately has a more pessimistic view on the central relationship of its narrative than Together, both movies use their horror elements to startling effect. Both films also prove willing to take their narratives into some dark territory, calling to mind the kind of complicated feelings that any long-term relationship can naturally conjure up over time. If you enjoyed the antidate Nate vibes of Together, then Your Monster is a great, and occasionally gruesome, follow-up. 6. Lisa Frankenstein. A darkly hilarious riff on 1980s teenage rom-coms. While Lisa Frankenstein might have faltered at the box office, the hilarious riff on high school films of the 1980s shares a dark sense of horror humor with Together. Both movies use their horrifying premises to comic effect, whether that be an undead poet falling in love with an unstable teenager or a couple resorting to a turkey carver to cut themselves apart. This gleefully grim approach to the comedic elements of their respective stories gives Lisa Frankenstein and Together a similar dark comedy tone, especially as the full ramifications of their worlds take effect. Both films also rely heavily on their stars to carry the deceptively tricky tonal balancing act, while Alison Brie and Dave Franco's natural chemistry makes them particularly effective as Tim and Millie. Catherine Newton and Cole Sprouse's relationship finds a solid dynamic that can be turned from comedic to romantic on a dime. The unholy fusion of John Hughes and John Waters, Lisa Frankenstein is a good pick for fans of Together's dark comedy. 5. Bones and All. A haunting and bittersweet reflection on relationships. A meditative and self-reflective look at both cannibalism and the prospect of forming bonds with others. Bones and All's unsettling subject matter and painful vulnerability make it a fitting companion piece to Together. Bones and All is a haunting look at the romance between Marin and Sully, 2 young cannibals traveling the United States. Bones and All crosses a lot of moral lines audiences might not be expecting, but it never necessarily condemns its lead characters. Instead, it keeps the twisted and grisly elements of the horror largely to the side of the film's main focus, which is Marin's perspective on bonds and her relationship with Sully, committed to a form of romantic idealism that has become warped by their unnerving tendencies to eat other people. Bones and All's morally complex, quietly unnerving, and undeniably bittersweet ending shares a lot of the thematic staying power that makes Together's ending so effective. 4. Life After Beth. A dark comedy about the pain of moving on. Life After Beth approaches the sadder aspects of a long-term romance much in the same way Together reflects on a relationship that has stagnated, all through the helpful visual lens of horror conventions. Life After Beth is a darkly hilarious but quietly somber movie about relationships ending, all personified by a young man discovering that his recently dead girlfriend has revived. Life After Beth benefits from a fully committed performance, similar to the way that Together only really works because Alison Brie and Dave Franco are able to bring both the gonzo and grounded elements of the story to life with equal believability. Aubrey Plaza does something similar in Life After Beth, a charming performance that gradually grows horrifying and tragic. There's a clear tragic undercurrent to Life After Beth that makes it especially emotionally resonant. It's a movie about romance and the pain of it ending, something that Together also addresses amid all the body horror. There's a blunt honesty to the way both movies approach the problems in relationships that gives them an interesting thematic and tonal connection. 3. A Ghost Story. A supernatural approach to a tragic romance. An artistically minded and heart-wrenching approach to the horror genre, A Ghost Story's use of the genre to tell a very human story about moving on is similar to the way Together tackles a flawed but loving relationship. A Ghost Story focuses on the ghost of a man who witnesses how the world, and his partner, moves on after his death. The use of an established horror subgenre gives A Ghost Story a lot of its unique edge, especially as the film becomes more existential as the story goes on. However, there's a clear commitment to the relatable emotional fears of being forgotten or seeing a partner move on without you. There's also a bittersweet detachment and embrace of something larger at play, an aspect that together plays more for scares than A Ghost Story's understated somber edges. They're both thoughtful and artfully made films that bring a greater element of existential dread to their approaches to romance in ways that feel sad for different reasons. 2. The substance. For fans of elevated body horror. For fans of body horror that uses the concept as a way of exploring weightier topics, The Substance and Together are both must-watch films. The Substance and Together both indulge in monstrous transformations and horrifying body shifts, using well-constructed practical effects to transform their main characters. While The Substance isn't focused on romance, its keen focus on characters experiencing dread about their personal lives is amplified by the amazingly constructed horror effects. Neither movie is for the faint of heart, especially when the final monstrous fusions of their main characters play out on screen.